Hello and good afternoon. Can everyone see me okay? Can everyone hear me okay? I am actually great at ventriloquism. I have 3 wonderful interpreters working with me this afternoon, and I see we have some deafblind interpreting happening as well. I am pleased to talk to you today about Lead K, and I'm wondering if maybe some of you have heard of that before. Not quite sure exactly what it is, but I'm going to let you know. Now, we have a lot of deaf children who are being born, and when they are going into school age years, we're finding that they're starting from scratch, that they're unable to match their appropriate age level and skill. They're not ready for kindergarten. Their language skills aren't there. And we talk about language deprivation in this way, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a later slide. Language proficiency, bilingual language proficiency is important, but specifically it's most important that they have a language that they are proficient in, whether it be English or ASL or both. Now thirdly, we want to talk about who's responsible for this readiness. Is it the health department who are screening deaf children when they are born? Or is it the parents or the school system? But unfortunately, these children are not ready, and the consequences, the outcomes, are not favorable. And we want to make sure that we have accountability built into our system, which thus far has not been in legislation. We want to talk about family partnership, family education, and making sure that we are providing quality services to these deaf children and that they're able to develop their identity as deaf individuals. This legislation has been passed in 3 stages already, but we will be looking forward to more changes in the future. Alrighty. Human rights. Human rights are not something that are given, but babies are born with these innate human rights. This was recognized by the United Nations and their Education Committee. Therefore, it also was ratified by the World Federation of the Deaf, WFD. Those human rights are inevitable, but unfortunately in many locations, people are not realizing these human rights, and systems are deciding what's best for children. But who decides that? Maybe the parents decide that they don't want to give their children medicine for a specific health concern. Is it okay for whatever reason for families to withhold care and just leave it up to the natural process of things? Well, then what would happen to the infant? Do we think that that's okay, or do you think that they should help the baby? Many people actually think that they have to go to court and have the medicine court mandated to save the baby. Or what about simple things like food? If the families aren't providing food and care to the child, CPS, Child Protective Services, would be called in, and in many cases, the parents would be in trouble. If neglect is happening, that's also something that has repercussions. However, right now, language deprivation is still pretty nebulous. Before you go ahead and read this slide, now we have many laws that have been passed over many years. However, we need more legislation going forward. We do have all of this legislation, but it's not specific to children's right to language acquisition, and also it doesn't speak to who is responsible and accountable for children arriving to kindergarten ready to learn. Many children are arriving to kindergarten and school age far behind their peers because of the language deprivation that they've experienced in their early years. So we need this new legislation, LEAD K, which is the Language Equality and Acquisition for Deaf Children, kindergarten ready. That's what LEAD K stands for. Other reasons for language deprivation that anyone would like to share. There are certainly more things that we can talk about. But unfortunately, these things are happening all over the United States, and we want to change that by adding this new legislation. The goals of LEAD K is to make sure that every child can succeed and will have language acquisition before starting kindergarten. It's a very simple goal. We want our children to be ready on grade level to begin kindergarten at the age of 6, and in some states at the age of 5. We want to emphasize that many people confuse language with communication, but as you see here, we have this equation almost, that communication is not equal to language. Language is related to communication, but you must have language first. Some people think, oh, well, my kids can hear and speak okay. That means that they have language. But really, hearing or speaking, reading and writing, gesturing, cued speech, standing on your head, drawing, all of these things are communication methods or mechanisms to be able to express yourself in language. Now, language could be American Sign Language, English, Spanish, any other language, Vietnamese, Cambodian, it could be Portuguese, any language really. But the mechanisms are the same. Communication modes are applied to any language that someone may have. Not only families are confusing this, but many professionals are focusing specifically on the mechanics of getting across feelings or ideas. But the main idea of this legislation is that language is where it needs to start. Language is so important not only to succeed in school and in relationships, but to succeed in life long term. Students need to be able to learn, and language really lends itself to this learning. As an aside, LEAD K is not forcing American Sign Language. I want to make sure that everyone understands that really it's about language. We want children to acquire language before going into kindergarten, regardless of what the language is. The point of this legislation is so that they're school age ready. It is, most people think that it's normal for deaf children to have a language delay, but that's based on the deprivation. And often deaf children are labeled as delay, but how can they pick up language if they don't have access to it? It's really a deprivation issue. It's the system's fault. It's not the parents' fault, it's the system itself. Often people think, oh, it's probably best that the deaf child only learns one language at a time. But our brains are very elastic and they can pick up multiple languages at the same time. Deaf children can learn English and ASL and even a third or fourth language. Research shows that individuals who have proficiency in several languages actually have better skills and more cognitive ability than those who only have one language. Language acquisition allows individuals to be ready for things that come their way in the future, and people who have multiple language are really ahead of the game from their peers. People think that if deaf children learn sign language, that it will slow down their ability to learn auditory skills and speech, but sign language actually supports the learning of listening through an assistive device and speaking. Hearing people teach their hearing babies baby signs, even if they're not deaf parents and deaf children. Hearing individuals are teaching sign language in their homes. Why is that? Well, babies aren't quite ready to talk yet, and their motor coordination to use their mouth hasn't developed fully, so being able to use signs helps them communicate with their parents earlier in life. Often, even hearing pregnant women will look forward to teaching their baby sign language. However, oddly enough, when a deaf child or a child is found to be deaf, people are amazed and shocked. They don't know how to deal with this child, but really they could just be teaching them sign language. This cartoon shows us the sad reality of our culture these days. If you're learning language but you don't have content or context, it's hard to make those connections. You don't fully have access to real life experiences and hands-on activity. Now, how can you relate that if you don't have language? It's not about just vocabulary being used, but also the context and the content that's being learned. Often people think, well, it's the parent's choice. But lots of parents really say, oh goodness, if only I had known. I've had several parents tell me, if only I had known that there were other people that my child could be socializing with. Often parents are told, oh, well, we have some bad news. Your child is deaf, but the good news is that you can, teach them sign language, or you could put a cochlear implant or send them to learn how to talk. But hearing people who've never met a deaf person before, who have a baby who is deaf, it's almost kind of like an alien from Mars. They don't know what to do with this little child that they are now taking care of. So they think, well, I want them to be just like me. I support the use of assisted devices, but I'm against language deprivation. I would say that it's not the parent's choice because they don't have all of the options set before them. Lead K is really emphasizing education of those parents of all of the options that could be set forth before them to help their children succeed. This is the front home page of our website, and you can go ahead on your own time and take a look around. It is www.leadk.org. And I just want to be sure that you include the hyphen, the lead-k.org, because if you miss that, you won't find us. There's a lot of information about what's going on there.
Okay, so the goal of Lead K is to eliminate language deprivation. and know that these deaf kids can be successful and provide them access to that. We want to make sure that language, communication is fully accessible. It doesn't matter if the family speaks Spanish or French or English or German or whatever language is used at home, that those languages are made accessible to the child, and to make sure that communication is happening at home. And the baby has very limited sight at birth, and that's one of the reasons why children's books have large print and large picture, because their vision hasn't fully developed and they're not that coordinated yet. And so their access to lip reading is very limited. But if we are using a signed language, it makes it more accessible. Now, I'm old and I prefer those large print versions now myself. We also need to use some language benchmarks. Some states use the language milestones, and do we know what they are? Often parents don't know. They think, well, you know, my child is 1, and the child is still not communicating with me, and I notice my child is very frustrated. But the parents aren't aware of what children should be able to do at age 1. And maybe the doctors don't know, and the therapists aren't aware either. And so often they just say, well, the child is deaf, and that seems to be normal, and that they will catch up, but that doesn't happen. And the point is that parents don't have the tools. Parents just don't know, because they're not trained. They don't have deaf education degrees. They're not certified. And they're not provided the resources that would help them to be more successful parents. And parents want their children to be successful. Right from birth, parents say, someday you're going to be president of the United States. And if your child is deaf, your expectations should be exactly the same. There is a law for early hearing detection in infants. It's the EHDI law, which tests infants' hearing at birth. And from that, we have the IDEA law, which is the law that makes education accessible for children. It says that from birth to age 3, there will be a family services professional involved, so that there's an educational plan, so goals can be set to have a therapist come into the house once or twice a week to work with the children. Often people live in rural communities, and opportunities for these types of resources are limited. So by providing an IPFS, that information is transferred from the Department of Health to the Education Department, where often they'll come up with an IEP. I'm sure many of you had an IEP when you were in school. And that process is not always clear. Often therapy is given to the children. It might happen only once a week, and language deprivation occurs. And so we need to be sure that parents have the tools and that they are exposed to their resources. The children need language exposure as well.
Yes.
And once these assessments of the children happen, who gets the information? Where does the report go? So Lead K really wants to change that. They want the IFSP person, the therapist, the speech therapist, people who are usually there to focus on getting the student or the child to hear and talk. We would like for parents to be have access to deaf role models, and that also in turn will create more job opportunities for deaf people. We would like one of these professionals to assess the child every 3 months. It's up to the states, but minimally, they should be assessed every 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
There are different assessment tools used all over the United States, but LEAD K would like to ensure that when the state passes the law, whatever it may be, they must establish an ad hoc committee of varying fields representing deaf fields, deaf professionals, hearing professionals, audiologists, people who work with the bicultural bilingual model, just so that they have access to all of the tools available. Often there are only 1 or 2 or 3 tools available, and so a system in place where tracking can happen. We have a system where we know we have a count of how many deaf children there are, but we don't know the quality of their life or the services that they receive. And we think, well, they're doing fine. They're not sick, so we just leave them be. This is where state accountability comes in the picture. And this happens through data collection. And so if we're assessing people every 3 months or every 6 months, that information is going to go into a system so we can assess how the student or child is progressing. If they seem to be stagnant, that means that we need to provide some intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Children are not to go into school and learn the language when they get there. Mm-hmm. So LEAD K can help this process by training state agencies on how to do legislative advocacy, how to propose bills to the legislators, how to follow through in that process, and how to get people involved and lobbying. Often people will be opposed, and so we want as many people as possible on the ground and running. Mm-hmm. And often people think that they have an idea to propose, but they don't know where to start. So those are our goals. The states that are in the dark blue have passed this legislation. The light blue are in process. Actually, this information is from this past summer. So we may have more blue states. Does anybody see your state there? Okay, you're from California. That's great. They are the best. Mm-hmm. California was the first to pass this law in November of 2015. Mm-hmm. So you're from California. Okay, so Kansas and Hawaii and California are the 3 who have already passed. There are a few already working on this legislation. Some are seeing some opposition. Some think that our goal is to force ASL, and sometimes they're just dropping the issue because of the opposition. But often bills don't pass the first time. And so we need to try a second and a third time. We need to develop relationships with the legislators. Do you know the names of your legislators? Where are you from?
Minnesota.
Minnesota? Oh, I don't think that they're involved yet. Okay, so you need to know who your legislators are. I bet you can Google it.
Of course, I'll do that right now.
And Google is my best friend. Google has all the answers. Mr. Google. Okay, so you don't want to contact your legislators in an emergency situation, but it's important that you get to know them, meet them, say, hello, I voted for you, and these are the issues I'm concerned about. I believe these issues would benefit my community. It could be something related to well-being or creating a new park. Mm-hmm. It's just important that you be in touch with your legislators. Know where the state office is. The Association of the Deaf is often part of this. If there isn't anything local, that's fine. You know, a lot of times people are really afraid to try, but be brave. Get out there and meet these people. You can get some advocacy training as well, so you are able to support these issues. We have some partnerships. And also Niall has set up a foundation, and some of the money that he receives through his foundation is being siphoned through to Lead K. We also have Sherry Farina. The way you pronounce her name is Farinha. But a few years ago in California, when I was working at CSUN, that's how I know some people here from CSUN, but we just had this strong feeling that something needed to change, and we just see so many parents going to the community center to provide services to the community, to make sure parents are getting involved and to provide information, but we wanted to really change things. And the change really needed to happen between ages 0 and 5. And honestly, how can anyone disagree with that? And we contacted legislators and said, you know, we really want all children to succeed. And that seemed like a no-brainer that we would start at ages 0 through 5. And so we proposed some ideas, and of course we were asked how much is it going to cost. But a lot of the services are already required by law. And so there may need to be a bit of a budget to start, but mostly we needed a data system. And California passed it and took it from there. The fourth woman who is a partner with us is Julie Rems-Mario. She has made a lot of video clips and promotional materials, so you may see her work. She's really doing quite well right now. We have our national committee and the various partners and people involved. So your home state may have a faction. Maybe you could get involved in some advocacy or some public relations work or development. You could develop materials. You could pass out information. There's a lot of varying roles that you could get involved in. So maybe you're curious as to how many deaf children there are in your state from ages 0 to 21. Do we know how many are in public school? That information should be accessible. California has that data, but it's old. It's from 2008. And since 2008, they have collected no data. And so our legislators were appalled at that, and which is one of the reasons we were able to get this together. We communicate with each other through base camp. So we have a core team, and all of the states that you saw that were blue have their own core teams, and so we get together occasionally and share information. And you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of good ideas out there. It just needs to be shared. "100% of California's House and Senate passed this law. No one opposed. That is very unusual. I mean, look at our Congress right now. They're chasing their tails. But for this one law, everyone approved, and they saw that it was the right thing to do. So they had the statistics from 2008 that said 93% of all deaf students, 17,000 deaf students in the public school system in California. That's a pretty big number. Only 7% of them are on grade level. And that was from the data collected in 2008. And so that is significantly below where we want them to be. Now, okay, so 95% of deaf students are not on grade level. 93% of hard of hearing students are not on grade level. And I was surprised at that percentage. They thought later they would depend on rehabilitation, welfare, but if we start at the beginning, they can go to college, they can get education, they can pay back their debt, and that's what the legislature saw that could happen. So each state is probably going to have a little bit of a different law, but this was what was in the initial bill, and this would be the basic structure for each state's law. So it's important that the states establish an ad hoc committee full of all the varying tools and resources that are available. This is fairly recent, which happened in January. Now, who is responsible? When infants are born, it seems that the Department of Health takes responsibility, but honestly, it is an educational issue. It has to do with language acquisition, and so we need to work with the system. And so we decided that the health department can still be involved, but it also needs to tie in. It needs to be a seamless transition, so the information learned initially must be passed on to the Department of Education. And right now, what is happening is that there's a crack in the communication and the information is lost. So we need to work diligently to make sure that the health department and the Department of Education are working together. These are the developmental milestones for language acquisition. This isn't it in completion, but it gives you an idea of what children are to be able to do. By 6 to 9 months, children should be able to have eye contact and should be responsive and should have some basic signs. It's almost like babbling, and they're signing, but maybe with not the right hand shape. Yeah, right. Somebody said they may sign cookie, but use only one pointer finger. It's like baby talk. It may not have a specific meaning, but the parents understand, and that's what baby talk is. And often parents don't know that this babbling or baby talk is the same for deaf children and hearing children. Now, by age 1, children should know their names, so when parents call, they respond. They should know the word no. They should be able to follow simple instructions. So if the mother asks, where's the milk, they'd be able to point to the milk. And a lot of you might have experience raising your own children, and so we know that by age 1, most children should be able to do that. They also should have about 50 words, either spoken words or signed words. And if a parent asks, where's your eye, they should be able to point to their eye. Those types of things. Now, my friend, who is deaf, also has a deaf child. She brought her deaf child to see the doctor, the pediatrician, and this baby was 1. And the doctor looked and thought, well, deaf baby, deaf mother. And the doctor was saying, you know, are you guys starting to communicate? And the mother said, my baby has 100 words. And the doctor said, your child is a genius. And the mother responded, no, that's completely normal because she has full access to language. And so she has constant exposure. And a lot of parents underestimate their children or have lower expectations. And they think that they should not be able to do all of these extraordinary things. By age 2, they should be able to put a couple words together in short phrases. It doesn't matter if the child is deaf or hearing. For example, they might say, the baby is sleeping, or baby sleep, or car go, or bye-bye, and mom, and point. So if you were to say, where's your ball? They would run into the other room and pick up their ball. Or if you were to say, where's the cat? They would go run and find the cat. So they should be able to follow those simple instructions by 18 months to 2 years. They would also know the names of people. They should know their body parts, follow simple instructions. And by age 2 to 2.5, they should have a language explosion, so they should have about 200 words. They may begin asking questions. They may have a sense of humor. They should be laughing, maybe not acting silly, but they may say silly things or sign silly things to get people to laugh. They know when things are funny or when something is sad. And they also will develop their own sense of being and may be stubborn and say no. But a lot of hearing parents of deaf babies don't know that their deaf children should be able to meet these milestones no matter what language they're using. And that goes back to, is this the parent's decision? In the United States, people strongly believe that the parents have the right to decide what type of language or communication their child will use, and often they decide on English. And so if they're going with English, they're going to decide to rely on the child's hearing. And some deaf children are completely successful in that style. Some fail as well. I mean, it doesn't matter what the system is set up to look like. Some succeed and some fail. Often, if the child is delayed, they'll say, you know, no, it's okay, they'll catch up. But Lead K is set up to make sure that the children are meeting these developmental milestones. And so that the family also can be the child's best advocate and know
give them
tips for improvement and access. So that's what the ad hoc committee will do. They will find the tools, analyze the tools, collect data, and report that data. The process needs to be open, it needs to be inclusive and transparent. Often we see that deaf can't, and we want to prove that deaf can. There's a lot of political philosophies going on right now, but your child can't wait. Your child is growing, and the time is now. It's so important. It's critical. We don't want to lose another generation of deaf children. So if you want to get involved, but you're not sure how to get started, remember one snowflake. If you touch it, what happens? Obviously, it will melt. One snowflake is completely vulnerable, But if you get several snowflakes together, I mean, this is Rochester, you know what snow is. So you can make a snowball, and a snowball is more powerful. And the more you add, the bigger it gets, and the more power you have. It becomes an avalanche. The more people you have working together, the more successful you can be. You need to be advocates and allies. Lead K is completely dependent on donations right now. We have no governmental grants or subsidies. So we need donations and support from people who believe in the cause. I have a couple new books, and the profits from the sales of these books will be donated to Lead K, and here's one of them. I don't know if you have seen this before. These books will be sold tomorrow at the Rochester School for the Deaf. There's going to be a national conference on ASL and early childhood education. So I'll be selling my books there with my autograph. So the money from those sales will go to support Lead K. And this book is called Deaf Culture Fairy Tales. I'm sure you all know the story of Little Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, Snow White, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast. This book is completely different. The outcomes are a little bit different twists. The characters are deaf. There's some hearing in there. There's some fables, some songs. So remember, though, that the profits from this go to support Lead K. There are two versions. The other one is available online through Amazon. You can do that if you want. Or also the RIT bookstore is going to begin selling them in the fall. So maybe if you decide to buy them later, that's okay, no pressure. I also have this. It's a coloring book. I know a lot of people like to color right now. This is for ages 0 to 100. I see more and more adults really taking the time to do some Zentangle, do some coloring for meditation. It's really relaxing. So this coloring book includes pictures from the fairy tale book. So the purpose of this is for me to collect some money to donate to the Lead K initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Rosen. I really appreciate all the time you took this afternoon to talk to us about this important initiative with Lead K. Now, we do have some time, about maybe 20 minutes or so, for questions and answers from the audience. I would ask that if you do have a question, you come to the front of this stage over here to my left, and we will make sure that the interpreters and everyone in the auditorium can see your question. All right, so anyone who has a question, please form a line over here.
Yeah, and my question is regarding Lead K. What about undocumented parents?
The baby's born automatically a U.S. citizen.
The baby is automatically born as a U.S. citizen, but there may be fear about documentation that is reported to the government. So is there any support given to those parents in reaffirming them that information is kept confidential in terms of their family?
That is such an important question. Thank you, Anna. Now, in California, as well as in Texas, and maybe so in Arizona as well, what is happening there? The conversation is, does the law apply to them? Because many parents who are undocumented are afraid of retribution.
They don't have the resources they need.
And they don't have the resources that they need. The center in California already has a Deaf Family Resource Center in Sacramento. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from the South. Now, in Sacramento, they have a center in SoCal. they work with families. I'm not sure about the reporting system. I really don't have an answer to that, but we do have some resources that we can give the parents as far as milestones and things like that, and we could certainly give that to the undocumented parents. And there are so many languages documented in California, not only just Spanish, but Spanish has lots of dialects, and so really California is really great with working with families with different language needs. So I think talking to the parents, giving them the resources, and then they can be resources to the other families in their community. Thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you. My question is about early intervention. I'm in graduate school for early intervention, but all of the information I'm seeing is speech focused. There's not much support for early intervention in sign languages.
How can you support EI having these services if graduate school doesn't have them?
How can we support these services if graduate schools don't have them?
Okay, early interventionists are very important. Now, it does depend on the curriculum. We do have some training programs and some that are lacking. Looking for those programs who support the bilingual approach would be my advice. A lot of teacher prep programs do include both sign language and spoken language, although some do not. And so I think it's a matter of being selective. The growing number, maybe you've heard of Sky High in Utah. They have a hearing specialist that will then work with a deaf mentor because they see that there's a need there to grow those services and for deaf individuals to be exposed to deaf role models. Are you going to become one?
Well, I'm hearing, so I wouldn't be qualified for that position.
Oh, but you could be a hearing ally. We don't need deaf people to do all the work. You can team up with someone and work in tandem for them. That would be great for you.
I want to make sure that when hearing parents have a deaf baby, that they're reassured that things will be okay and that they have the resources to know what they are going to need to do.
That's great. I really would encourage you to become a hearing ally because our community certainly needs people like you. Thank you very much for your question.
And my name's Terry.
So I feel like there are three different arguments to looking at the lead case. Some people in support, some in, not in support, and then some feeling neutral. I feel like the medical field, audiologists, psychologists, they're not fully informed. And when they have a deaf baby in their office, they think that the cochlear implant or hearing aid are their only option because they're focusing on the ear. I'm wondering with Lead K, will they support the necessary resources for the medical professionals and community to know that Lead K is an option, that there are other resources for these families who have children who have been found to have hearing loss?
You hit the nail on the head. That's the heart of the issue. The age-old issue and debate that we've had for over 100 years. We've relied so often on the medical professionals' opinion and training. Often there are short seminars on those who have special needs, and that's all that those medical professionals receive in their training. And that's not enough. And we've been fighting that issue for a long time. When I was the NAD president, that was still an issue that we were dealing with. The world is so large and our boat is so small. We feel like it's an overwhelming project to have to tackle. Of course, there are medical professionals who are worth their salt, but there are those who are not. But the key is that we do need to start with legislation that starts with accountability and helps parents get the resources that they need so that when children arrive at school, they're not in a position where they have to be remediated. There are 2 or 3 states where families who had mainstream deaf children sued because they did not have access to resources that they needed, and they were being promoted by social promotion. And those families won their cases. We don't want families to have to go through that anymore, so we need to start with early intervention. And that's the point of the legislation, which forces accountability. And that will trickle down into preparation of medical professionals. It will trickle down into giving families the resources they need to start tackling this issue at the source and at the root. So we need more people like you who are ready to put their foot down, put the time and energy in to end language deprivation. Thank you. I'm an English instructor here in my 5th year of teaching. Here our English department and NTID have diversity in our students and their educational backgrounds because of their ACT scores. We see vast difference in their critical thinking and literacy skills. And as an English instructor, facing that is a real challenge about how to match all the needs of all my students in one classroom. My question for you is, what do you see NTID's role in all of this being?
Wow, you're giving me a blank check. I love it. Really, we have an issue with even deaf individuals going into college not being college ready. And that has been a problem for a very long time. It really is about the curriculum. Now, many high schools are telling students that they're doing great in school and they just pass them through the grade levels. And unfortunately, they arrive to NTID or other colleges and they're not able to do basic algebra. And the struggle is real for them because they weren't given a realistic expectation growing up. Research has shown that if language is deprived much past the age of 3, that the intelligence factor of children actually decreases significantly. And again, this is a system-wide issue. Some individuals are very successful in spite of the system. We need to give them whatever we can to support them. Often in college, deaf individuals who maybe did not use sign language before learn it, and then they have the ability to work in a bilingual program and they thrive. I know that NTID is working with community outreach in the STEM fields, that you're having competitions for math competition and other things, and I think making studying and school, like Academic Bowl and other competitions, to be more interesting for students is really motivating for them. I think that that's helping in a small way already. I think the faculty can be more involved with Lead K initiatives here in New York and support when the time comes that the bill is on the table in your legislation to really lobby with your legislators. Tomorrow I will be presenting more at RSD at their conference, and we're going to talk specifically about ONI, which is someone from
Kim Kerrs is the point of contact for Lead K New York.
So Kim Kerrs is the point of contact for Lead K New York. High school teachers feel frustration and they blame it on the middle school teachers. And the middle school teachers then feel frustration with deaf children who weren't necessarily prepared for their classes in elementary school. And so the buck gets passed from teacher to teacher. And the preschool teacher says, well, hey, it's the parents' fault. And then the mom blames the dad, right? The blame has to start somewhere. But to answer your question, we have to break the chain, we have to break the cycle, and we are needing to assume responsibility, and we need to make the states responsible as well.
I work here at NTID.
I think we've met before.
Yes, we have. I have a comment and a question.
I'm not sure everyone can see you.
So when children are assessed upon birth, often they may be assumed to be hearing until identified as deaf.
So the hearing parents don't. Often the hearing parents aren't aware of sign language, and they aren't aware of advocates in the area to advocate for the deaf children. I have traveled the world, and one common occurrence is language deprivation for deaf children. Many kids don't go to school until age 10 or 12, and they do this without any type of communication access. And they don't teach them sign until maybe age 12. And in my personal experience, I was born hearing, and so I did acquire language. I came here to the United States 7 years ago, and I was learning English while I was here. But because I already had a language, it made it easier. So now, my question for you is, does Lead K have any plans to support internationally? I know that we need to work on the United States, but do you have any plans to get involved internationally?
Wow, what an important point you made, that once you have a language base, learning a second, third, or fourth is much easier. That is an advantage that you had, Bakar. And like yourself from Africa or any other individuals from other communities or cultures that don't have clean water, many issues with their health care, maybe they're in wartime, if they already have language and they come to America, they really take off. But those individuals may come to get their degree and then go back to their home countries to set up a better education system for the deaf individuals in their home country. I really think that that's a hard question. Really, I agree with you that social workers and other medical professionals aren't necessarily in the know. The EDI conference passed several years ago that they have an early detection screening for babies who are born. No baby has a hearing loss, right? If you've never had hearing, if you're born deaf, then you didn't lose anything, right? But we're trying to change the language in the medical field, that instead of hearing loss, we say hearing level. But they saw that there's a break in the system, and we're trying to involve people at that level to change the language around how we talk about deafness. Lead K is not an international initiative. However, we are partnering with the National Association for the Deaf and WFD, World Federation of the Deaf, and both of those organizations are in very much support of this idea of getting rid and stopping language deprivation. Sign language is a human right, and that's something that WFD has said for years. WFD will have another conference this November taking place in Budapest, in Hungary. And we will have a conference on language and politics. So really, if you can find the funding to go, I would really suggest that you do so. Lead K will be a model, but I know that there are other countries already working hard at the same types of things to really rid our communities of language deprivation and give these children access.
CRPD?
The CRPD It's the Convention on Human Rights for People with Disability. They require sign language. Now, the Obama had ratified something similar, but it has not gone through Congress yet. You can look on the internet for CRPD, and you can see which countries have already ratified this into law. Canada, some other places in Europe have, but here in America, the thinking is that with the IDEA Act, that this next law isn't necessary. Okay, I think we're running low on time.
My name's Joshua. I'm a freshman here, and I'm a cross-registered student. My question is about thinking ahead. Once Lead K has been ratified in every state.
Only 3 states thus far.
I know, but I'm thinking long term. Hopefully all those states will ratify the bill. Then what's next?
That's a great question. You tell me. You're pretty young. Just
I don't know.
any ideas? What should be next? What do you think?
I'm wondering if you have long-term plans and goals set. I know what your immediate next steps are in Lead
Well,
K.
we're still working on that. We're kind of walking through a swamp right now. We have a long way to go. But wow, can you imagine if all babies have language? That will be amazing. You know, the IDEA Act actually started in several states, and as state after state passed the law, then Congress finally listened and it became a federal law. We also feel that Lead K could follow in those same steps, that after several states ratify this legislation, that then the federal government will as well. We don't believe that that would happen right now because of the state of Congress, but we feel that that would certainly happen in the future. We want all states to be accountable for language acquisition of all children. Where are you from? Minnesota. Good to see you.
Hi, my name's Millie. In my writing seminar, we actually had an assignment about Lead K and the partnership with the Niall DeMarco Foundation, and about the Niall DeMarco Foundation's support of bilingual, bicultural education. Since there's often the medical model that's been followed in terms of deaf children and how they should be supported or are in fact not supported, often parents will seek out information but are not provided with the appropriate resources. So are there other ways that parents can get information that isn't necessarily through their pediatrician or doctor?
I'm going to answer your question really quickly because I only have a couple minutes left, but Lead K wants to make sure that all parents are getting neutral resources that are not biased. Now, parents are getting resources that are very biased. ASL is actually only mentioned in 2 places in many of these resources, and only a sentence or 2. And so we want neutral information and complete information given to the parents. Now, going back to the Niall Foundation, that is supporting bilingualism, and I myself support bilingualism. However, I want to make sure that it's understood that Lead K as legislation will act in a neutral space. And really we want to look specifically at language deprivation and making sure that that's not happening regardless of which language is offered.
How can children who grow up in isolation have access to language acquisition?
What is the sign that you're meaning? Do you mean if they are in a mainstream setting?
I'm talking about if children are completely isolated, how can they acquire language?
Well, children will acquire language if they have access to language. maybe their hearing aids. Some people use hearing aids very successfully. Other people use cochlear implants successfully. But we want language, whatever mode it comes in, to be accessible. It's hard to reach out to those individuals who are in remote areas, but we want this legislation to help the advocates, the early interventionists, that they can work in conjunction with the parents to make language access possible.
I have a deaf 2-year-old who's hard of hearing and a 6-month-old. You'll see a video of the 2-year-old tomorrow at RSD.
So my question is actually about...
My question is actually about accountability, which sounds great. But my 2-year-old has been in early intervention in 2 states.
I want to know what that really means.
And I want to know what that really means because, for example, even in this area, if you have a deaf child and you want ASL, you get an early intervention whose signs. The default is to give them 1 hour of services a week. And it's not evidence-based. As a scientist, I care about evidence and accountability. So in theory, we're adding accountability. And the child is only getting that service as a delay, then a change should be made in the services. So what does this really mean in the state of California when this is passed to add accountability? Because as you pointed out, it's on the line, but there's no accountability in IEPs. So who is accountability in the state to make these changes?
First of all, I'm thrilled to have a parent here this afternoon. We always need to find our parent advocates in the room, so thank you very much for coming forward. Now, I agree. A 1 hour a week is nothing in the grand scheme of things, and so how can we make homes more accessible? How can parents or caregivers care and support in a way that promotes language acquisition? I think really it's exposure. 30,000 times of being exposed to a word is actually how much someone needs to actually learn to adapt that word into their use. And so you're right, things need to improve. There's no one right method. Some people choose English, some people choose ASL, and we're in support of just language acquisition in general. The benchmarks are important. We have programs that have group therapy where families can come, and while the babies are playing together, there are adults who sign or are deaf themselves. That's increasing the number of hours that they are exposed to native sign language because they're hanging out with each other. I would be happy to sit down with you and talk about more things on a one-on-one basis, but you're right. The IFSP really needs some more accountability. If the laws are passed, then EI is actually responsible for doing some analysis, some data collection, and then reporting to the state. And so it's going to take a while for us to aggregate all of this data. And we also want to aggregate it so that the privacy of the families are protected. But my time is up, and I would really love to have a conversation offline with you. I see that some people are leaving for class and other things. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.